It was a cold evening when 12-year-old Jack sat alone at the edge of Crystal Lake, barefoot, hungry, and trembling. He wasn't there for fun. He was there to catch a single fish, not for sport, but to feed his little sister back home. Their parents had vanished years ago, and since then, life had been nothing but a storm of survival and silence. As Jack reeled in the tiniest fish with shaking hands, a sharp voice shattered the calm. "Fishing here is illegal without a permit," barked a tall man in a pristine uniform, flanked by two officers. Jack tried to explain, but his words were drowned by the sound of a fine being written, and his fish snatched and tossed back into the water. The officers laughed as they walked away, leaving the boy in tears with a crumpled paper in hand and an empty stomach. That single act of humiliation wasn't just about a fish. It planted a fire so deep in Jack's soul, it would burn. For decades, because that day, the lake wasn't just water, it was power. And Jack swore one day it would be his. He limped back home that evening, empty-handed, his pride bruised more than his feet. The cold wind bit through his torn hoodie, but the thought of Emma waiting kept him warm. She greeted him, with wide eyes and hopeful joy, unaware of the insult he just endured. "Did they let you fish today, Jack?" she asked, clutching her blanket tighter. Jack smiled, though his lips trembled. "Almost. Tomorrow I'll get one for sure," she nodded, trusting him completely, her faith alight in their shivering darkness. He had been fined for trespassing, just for trying to feed his sister with one fish. The officer laughed as he handed him the paper, surrounded by mocking whispers. Jack said nothing, swallowing his tears like medicine, bitter but necessary. At just 9 years old, he had learned the price of being poor, and at 7, Emma only knew the magic of fairy tales and her brother's hugs. Their innocence was their shield, though life tried to strip it away daily. Kids at school laughed at Emma's shoes, duct-taped and worn. They whispered when Jack came late, smelling of dumpsters and desperation. But neither complained. They held on to each other like lifelines. In a storm. Jack sold his last good pair of socks to buy Emma soup when she had the flu. He walked barefoot on frozen ground, his toes numb, heart on fire with love. She drank that soup like it was gold, thanking him with sleepy eyes and a kiss. They had no toys, no family visits, no warm holidays. But they had moments, quiet ones, where they found peace in each other's arms. And in those moments, innocence wasn't lost. It was protected like treasure. Jack once found a broken fishing rod in the trash and repaired it with string. He taught Emma how to hold it, saying, "Someday we'll fish in our own lake." She believed him, not because it was likely, but because it came from his heart. As Jack walked by the lake, he couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice stir inside him. The once serene waters now felt like a symbol of everything he couldn't have, everything he was denied. He wondered how long he would continue to live as a shadow of the world that looked down on him. One evening, as he watched a group of businessmen laugh beside the lake's edge, it struck him. This wasn't right. He could feel the weight of his dreams pressing against the surface of his thoughts. "I can change this," Jack whispered, not to anyone, but to himself, to the future he hadn't dared to believe in. He spent months working odd jobs, saving up whatever he could. His hands were rough, calloused, but they were his tools for change. His vision was clear. The lake was not just water. It was a dream, and he was going to own it. One day, while cleaning out his small storage unit, Jack found his first fishing rod, the one he'd repaired years ago. It was a reminder of his humble beginnings, of the boy who never gave up despite the odds stacked against him. Holding it, He realized that the only thing standing between him and everything he dreamed of was himself. He watched the successful businessmen again, now laughing louder, their lives so far from his own. But for the first time, instead of resentment, he felt something else: determination. "I'll show them. I'll show everyone," Jack thought, as a new resolve filled his chest. The lake wasn't just a piece of water anymore. It was his symbol of redemption. He would find a way, not just to fish there, but to own it, to show the world that it was never about money. It was about fighting for what's yours when no one else believes you deserve it. Jack's focus sharpened over the years. Every hour, every penny he earned was a step closer to his dream. He realized it wasn't about being the richest, but about proving that the impossible could be done. It wasn't just for him. It was for Emma and everyone who was told they didn't belong. Each day he worked with a fire inside him, a fire that burned away his doubts and insecurities. He remembered the mockery, the sneers, and it fueled him. Jack wasn't going to be defined by his past. His future, his success, would be the answer to all those who said it couldn't be done. It was one of those rare moments when Jack finally felt like he was getting somewhere. As he stood on the balcony of his newly acquired office, overlooking the lake he once fished at with nothing but dreams in his eyes, he felt a wave of pride. The glass windows reflected his journey, the years of pain, sweat, and sacrifice. But there was something more, a deep ache in his heart. His mind drifted to the days when he was just a boy on that same lake, catching fish and imagining a life beyond the rusty barriers set by the world. Those memories, once bitter and sharp, now seemed like the foundation for everything he had built. But even with all the success, a certain emptiness remained, one that he couldn't quite fill with anything else. Then, Emma entered the room. Her presence was like a wave of warmth, breaking through the coolness of his office. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, she didn't need to say anything. She saw it. The conflict that Jack had never shared with anyone, not even with himself. "Jack," she said softly, "you've made it. You've proved everyone wrong." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Emma always believed in him, but for some reason, her words didn't land the way they used to. They felt too empty, too superficial for the journey he had taken. He turned away, his gaze fixed on the lake. "I thought this would feel different, Emma. I thought that once I had it all, I'd feel complete." The words hung in the air, heavy, full of vulnerability, things Jack had never allowed himself to express before. "I've won the battle, but I still don't know if I've won the war." Emma took a step closer, placing her hand on his shoulder, offering him a silent comfort. "You're not just a CEO, Jack. You're a symbol, a reminder that the odds can be beaten, that anything is possible." But Jack only shook his head. "I thought that by having this," Jack said, motioning to the lake and the city skyline in the distance, "I'd finally prove them all wrong. But I think it's about more than that now. It's about something I've lost along the way, something I didn't even realize I was chasing." His heart was a tangled mess, and for the first time he understood the emptiness he'd been feeling. Emma's voice softened, understanding dawning on her face. "You think you've lost yourself in the pursuit, don't you?" Jack met her gaze, his eyes searching for the words to explain it. "I didn't just chase the dream. I left pieces of myself behind along the way, pieces that mattered more than the lake, the success, the money." It was the first time Jack had ever admitted it out loud. He had always been so focused on achieving, on proving the world wrong, that he forgot why he started. Now standing at the pinnacle of everything he had fought for, He realized that the journey had cost him more than just time. It had cost him his soul. Emma, with a warmth only she could offer, wrapped her arms around Jack. "It's okay," she whispered. "You've come so far, and you still have time. Time to find the part of you that you lost. You're not alone in this." Jack didn't say anything, but for the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe again. He had built his empire on his own, but the journey had left him isolated. Now, in Emma's embrace, he felt that warmth and hope he had once dreamed of. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle in. The path had been long, but now that he had everything, it was clear that the only thing missing was peace. "I'm ready to face what's left," Jack whispered, feeling the quiet certainty in his words. It wasn't the success he had built that mattered anymore. It was the healing, the growth, the rediscovery of who he was beneath it all. Emma smiled gently, as though she had known all along. "We'll figure it out together, Jack. You'll see." And for the first time, Jack allowed himself to believe that. Maybe, just maybe, the journey wasn't just about what you had to sacrifice to get to the top. It was also about finding what you had lost along the way. In the early days of his struggle, Jack knew what it meant to sacrifice everything for a dream that seemed impossible. It wasn't just about working late nights or going without sleep. It was more profound than that. Jack sacrificed his relationships, his mental health, and at times, his own dignity, just to stay afloat. He was willing to do anything to reach his goal. He remembered the days when he would walk past the lake with nothing but a fishing rod in hand, his heart full of hope. The people around him laughed, ridiculed him for his dreams, and told him to give up. But they didn't see what was happening inside Jack. They didn't see the silent battle he fought every day. Behind his quiet smile was a soul filled with pain, with the knowledge that he was alone in his pursuit, and no one understood the weight of the sacrifices he was making. What people didn't know was that Jack didn't just sacrifice his time or energy, he sacrificed his own sense of belonging. He distanced himself from his family and friends, pushing them away because he didn't want to risk letting them see how fragile he had become. He couldn't let them in because in his mind, if they saw his weakness, they would judge him. They would see him as the failure he feared he might be. In the moments when Jack would walk into his tiny apartment, exhausted from a grueling day of work, he would look at the walls, bare and silent, just like him. He couldn't bear the thought of being around others because he had nothing left to give. But the drive to succeed kept him going, like a relentless force that didn't care for his well-being, only for the end result. Every time he thought about giving up, he thought about the ridicule about the people who believed he would never make it, and that was what pushed him forward. But it came at a cost, and then the financial struggles came. His bills piled up and he was forced to make choices that no one should ever have to make. He skipped meals, sacrificing his own health so that he could put every penny toward his dream. Jack gave up on his happiness, believing that once he made it to the top, everything would fall into place. But what he didn't realize was that he was slowly losing himself along the way. The sacrifices he made didn't just impact his physical and mental health, they also impacted the way he saw the world. There were nights when Jack would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the family he no longer visited, the friends he no longer spoke to, and the life he had pushed aside. He had become so consumed by his goal that he didn't even notice the toll it was taking on him. The silence of his sacrifices was deafening, and it wasn't until later, when he stood on the balcony of his new office, overlooking the lake he once fished at with a sense of hope, that he realized how much he had truly given up. He had gained success, wealth, and recognition. But at what cost? His family had grown distant, and he had no one left to share his victories with. He had lost the connection that had once grounded him, and now, even with everything he couldn't fill the emptiness inside. The sacrifice of his relationships, his mental peace, and his sense of self had left him isolated. Jack had done it all silently. He never complained, never asked for help. He carried the weight of his sacrifices alone because he didn't want anyone to see how much it hurt. He thought he had to be strong, that he couldn't afford to show weakness. But the reality was different. The silent sacrifice was eating away at him, and no amount of money or success could make up for the loneliness he felt. One day, when Jack sat in his office, staring out at the lake that he now owned, he realized just how much he had given up to get here. It wasn't just about the years of hard work and sacrifice. It was about the people he had pushed aside in the name of success. And as the memories of his family, of those late-night talks with friends, of his humble beginnings flashed before him, he felt the weight of his own decisions. He thought about how much his father had worked to give him a better life, how his mother had sacrificed her own happiness to raise him. And now, Jack understood, perhaps too late, the value of those quiet sacrifices his parents made. They never asked for recognition, never sought praise for the things they did behind closed doors. They just did what was necessary out of love and duty, without expectation. And yet Jack had forgotten those lessons. He had thought that success would make everything right. But now, with everything he had ever dreamed of in his hands, he felt a sense of regret. The sacrifices that once felt necessary now seemed like mistakes. They had cost him so much more than he had realized. In the quiet moments of his life, Jack's determination was what kept him grounded. It was an unspoken force within him, an inner drive that fueled his every decision, pushing him to protect not only his dream but the very essence of who he was. There were times when the world seemed against him, when it felt like nothing was going right, but Jack knew one thing. No matter what, he couldn't let himself fall. He had always been the type of person who would never back down from a challenge, no matter how overwhelming it seemed. The determination in his eyes was a reflection of the battles he had fought, both in the world around him and within himself. And in the face of adversity, he would protect everything he cared about. Even if it meant going against the grain, even if it meant making the hardest choices, his protective instinct had always been there, hidden beneath his quiet demeanor. As a child, he had watched over his younger siblings, ensuring they were safe and cared for. As a teenager, he defended his friends when they faced injustice or ridicule. And now, as a man, his protective nature extended not just to the people he loved, but to his vision, to the lake that had once been his only escape, to the dream that had sustained him. When the legal battles began, Jack's protective instinct flared. They tried to take away the one thing that had brought him peace, the one thing that had connected him to his father. The one thing that had helped him feel alive amidst the noise of the world. They fined him for fishing, mocked him for his efforts, but they didn't realize who they were up against. Jack was no longer the same vulnerable young man who had once stood at the edge of the lake, casting his line in the hope of catching something more than just fish. He was a fighter now. His fire burned brighter, and his resolve had only hardened over the years. He didn't just fight for himself anymore. He fought for the memory of his father, for the legacy of those who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. He fought for the young boy who had spent countless nights wondering if he would ever amount to anything, for the family he had lost touch with, for the community that had once supported him, and for every dream he had ever dared to dream. The courtrooms became his battleground, and Jack entered each fight with a determination that left no room for doubt. He would not let them take the lake from him. Not now, not ever. He couldn't let the people who had wronged him succeed in stealing his future. Jack knew that if he didn't protect what he had worked for, no one else would, but his protectiveness extended beyond just the legal matters. He was also determined to protect the relationships that mattered, the ones that had always been there, waiting for him to come back. His mother's worried face, the lingering sadness in his sister's eyes, the quiet words of advice from his old friends, they had all been part of the foundation that had kept him grounded. And now Jack was determined to rebuild those bridges, to protect the connections that meant the most to him, even if it meant humbling himself. Jack's protective mood wasn't about aggression or confrontation. It was a quiet determination that came from within, a steady resolve to preserve what he held dear. His drive was not driven by pride or the desire for recognition. It was about safeguarding the values that had shaped him. It was about ensuring that the pain and sacrifices he had endured had meaning, that the path he had chosen had not been in vain. Every decision he made, whether it was about expanding his business, supporting his community, or reconnecting with his family, was motivated by this protective energy. He couldn't afford to let anything slip through his fingers, not after all the sacrifices he had made. Every step he took was with the intention of protecting his future, his legacy, and those who had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. His protective instinct was also a shield, a way to defend himself from the fears and doubts that constantly threatened to overwhelm him. There were moments when Jack felt the weight of his success bearing down on him, moments when he feared losing it all. But no matter how many times he stumbled or questioned his path, his determination kept him going, like an unwavering hand on his back, pushing him forward. As he stood at the edge of the lake he had once dreamed of owning, Jack's heart swelled with a sense of pride and purpose. This was more than just a business venture to him. It was a testament to everything he had endured and overcome. It was his way of protecting the dream that had kept him alive, his way of showing the world that no matter the obstacles, he would always rise above them. And as the sun set over the water, casting a golden glow over the surface, Jack knew one thing for sure. He would never stop protecting what he had fought so hard to achieve. Because no matter what life threw at him, his determination would always be his greatest ally. Regret has a way of creeping into the soul, often when least expected, and for Jack, it came with the weight of his past mistakes. Mistakes he had tried to bury under the mantle of success. The small town where he grew up, the people who had once been his family, were now distant memories, blurred by the years of struggle and self-inflicted isolation. It wasn't just the fine or the fights over the lake that gnawed at him. It was the long list of opportunities he had squandered, the relationships he had let slip away, and the choices he had made in his pursuit of success. Jack's regret wasn't something he could easily shake off. It lingered, like an invisible shackle that held him back from embracing the life he had worked so hard to build. Every time he looked at the lake, his lake, now a symbol of his triumph, he couldn't help but think about the time he had wasted, the moments he had missed, and the love he had neglected. The early years had been a blur of hustle, determination, and ambition. In the pursuit of his dreams, Jack had built walls around his heart, walls between himself and others. He had pushed people away, convinced himself that the only way to succeed was by keeping everyone at arm's length. It wasn't until much later, when success seemed hollow, that he realized the true cost of his choices. There was a moment, one evening when he stood alone by the water, that Jack felt the full force of his regret. The ripples in the lake seemed to mirror the turmoil inside him. He had sacrificed so much for this moment, the lake, the business, the wealth. But in the process, he had lost pieces of himself that he could never regain. His mother's face, once full of love and encouragement, had become a picture of disappointment. His sister, once so eager to share in his success, had distanced herself, unable to understand why Jack had pushed her away for so long. His old friends, the ones who had always been there, had faded from his life, their messages unanswered, their calls ignored. For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his choices. He had spent so much time chasing success that he had failed to realize that the very people he had once trusted had faded away. And yet, in the depths of this regret, something shifted within him. He realized that regret wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be acknowledged, faced head-on, and used as fuel for change. The path to redemption wasn't going to be easy. Jack knew it would take time. Time to mend broken relationships. Time to heal the wounds he had inflicted on those who loved him. But he also knew that it was the only way forward. If he wanted to find peace, if he wanted to truly be free, he had to make things right. The first step came in the form of a letter. He wrote to his mother, pouring his heart out in a way he never had before. He admitted his mistakes, his neglect, his blind ambition. He apologized for all the times he had let her down, for the moments he had taken her love for granted. It wasn't just about seeking forgiveness. It was about acknowledging the hurt he had caused and taking responsibility for it. The next step was harder. Jack reached out to his sister, asking to meet. He had always assumed she would be okay, that she would understand his drive, but the distance between them had only grown over the years. Their reunion was awkward at first. Words that should have come easily now felt foreign, strained. But as they sat together talking for hours, Jack realized that the time lost couldn't be recaptured. But maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something new. Slowly, they began to heal, learning to forgive not just each other, but themselves. The redemption arc wasn't just about apologizing. It was about proving, through actions, that he was capable of change. Jack began to invest not just in his business, but in the community that had always been there for him. He offered his time, his resources, and his expertise, helping to create jobs, providing mentorship, and ensuring that others wouldn't have to go through the same struggles he had faced alone. Jack's redemption was a slow, painful process. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. But each small step toward rebuilding trust, each act of kindness, each gesture of humility helped to lift the heavy burden of regret that had weighed on him for so long. And then, the most unexpected moment of all came. Standing in front of the very people who had once mocked him, those who had belittled his dreams, who had fined him for fishing, Jack found the courage to speak. He addressed the town, the community that had once rejected him, and shared the journey of his redemption. He admitted his mistakes, the times he had wronged them, but he also shared the lessons he had learned, the importance of forgiveness, of humility, of community. And in that moment, as he spoke from the heart, he realized that true redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making amends and moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose. By the time Jack had reached the peak of his redemption, it was clear to everyone that he had become someone different, someone better. He had turned his regret into a source of strength, and in doing so, he had found the peace he had been searching for all along. The lake, which had once represented a symbol of his painful past, now stood as a testament to his journey, a reminder that no matter how far you fall, redemption is always within reach. The wind howled across the lake, its cold fingers tugging at Jack's coat as he stood at the edge, staring out at the vast expanse of water that had once symbolized everything he had worked for. It was a feeling of weight, heavy, pressing, almost suffocating, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Jack had spent years trying to prove himself, trying to reclaim everything that had been taken from him, but now it seemed like his entire world was teetering on the edge of collapse. The letter that had arrived earlier that morning had shattered his carefully constructed world. It wasn't just any letter. It was from the town council, the same people who had fined him all those years ago for fishing. The same people who had dismissed his dreams, branded him as an outsider, and condemned him for daring to believe he could do something bigger than himself. But this letter wasn't a fine. It was a summons, a call to face his past, to confront the consequences of everything he had built, both good and bad. Jack felt the tension in his chest. His mind raced through every possibility. What did they want? Why had they reached out now? Was it another attempt to tear him down, to reclaim the land, the lake that had become his symbol of success? The questions swirled around him like a storm, each one more intense than the last. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of fear creeping up his spine. His pulse quickened as he thought of all the people who had mocked him, the ones who still remembered his humble beginnings, the times he had been nothing more than a dreamer, a kid with a wild ambition. They had all underestimated him, ridiculed him for daring to dream of success. But now, as he looked at the lake, the one thing that had been both a reminder of his struggle and his triumph, he knew this moment was pivotal. He couldn't afford to let fear take control. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. The letter had only one instruction: attend the town meeting. Come prepared to explain your actions. It sounded simple enough. But Jack knew it wasn't. It was more than just a meeting. It was the reckoning, the moment when everything he had built would either be justified or torn down. Depending on how, he responded. The weight of the past few years, of all the sacrifices, would either prove to be worth it or, in an instant, feel like the heaviest burden of all. For days, Jack debated whether to go. The pressure mounted with each passing hour. He had grown used to being in control, used to making the decisions that shaped his future. But this was different. The suspense was unbearable, like a ticking clock he couldn't silence. Every time he thought about it, he saw the faces of the people from his past, his family, the townsfolk, his old friends. He remembered their disbelief when he'd first dared to dream big. The same people who had once called him foolish now held the key to his future. Then something within him snapped. It wasn't fear that would define this moment. It was his resolve, his commitment to redemption, to proving not just to them, but to himself, that he could rise above it all. Jack clenched his fists, the adrenaline coursing through him. He knew what he had to do. He had to face them, confront his mistakes, and show them who he had become. This was his moment. This meeting could make or break everything he had worked for. Yet somewhere deep down, he knew he had a greater purpose now. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everything he had learned, everything he had overcome. Jack arrived at the town hall, the familiar faces of the council members staring at him from across the room. They had seen him as a threat for years. Now they saw him as the man who had everything. But Jack didn't feel powerful. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The same people who had tried to tear him down were now sitting before him, waiting for him to explain himself, to explain why he had defied them, why he had taken their criticism and turned it into fuel for his ambition. The moment the meeting began, the room seemed to close in on him. The town council leader, a stern figure with years of authority behind him, spoke first. "Mr. Jack Waters," he said, his voice steady and controlled, "you've built an empire on this lake, but many here still feel that you've taken something that was never yours. You've created a divide in this town. Now, we need you to tell us. Why should we allow you to keep what you've taken?" A wave of disbelief rushed over Jack. He had worked so hard for this. Everything he had, everything he owned, had been earned. But now, it was being called into question. And as the voices of the council members filled the room, a single question lingered in his mind. Was his success really worth the cost? But then, something unexpected happened. As Jack prepared to respond, something deep inside him shifted. The suspense was now replaced with clarity. He wasn't just defending his actions. He was standing up for everything he had built, everything he had fought for. He stood up, meeting the eyes of every council member in the room. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of every moment of struggle he had endured. "I didn't take anything," he said, his words cutting through the tension. "I built this from nothing. I've sacrificed everything to get here. And I've learned something important along the way. Success doesn't come from taking what's not yours. It comes from giving back, from working harder than anyone else, from not giving up even when everything seems impossible. I've learned that the real value isn't in ownership. It's in the people you've helped along the way." The room fell silent. For a moment there was no tension, no questions, just a collective pause. It was the most genuine response Jack had ever given, and the council members, the ones who had once thought him unworthy, now saw a man who had grown beyond his past. This was more than just about money, about the lake, or about the fines. It was about something deeper. It was about redemption. It was about understanding that true success came from the lessons learned and the people you helped along the way. Jack's words weren't just an answer. They were a statement of who he had become. And in that moment, the suspense of the past, few days dissolved, replaced by the promise of something better, something more meaningful, something that had been earned, not just by him, but by everyone who had ever believed in him. And as the council members finally nodded in approval, Jack knew that this was just the beginning. This was the moment that defined his future, a future built not on fear or resentment, but on redemption, on change, and on the courage to face the truth head-on. The town hall was quiet now, almost eerily so. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the room itself was waiting for something to break the stillness. Jack stood there, the weight of the moment finally settling in, the sound of his heart echoing in his ears. This was the point of no return, the decision that would shape everything that followed, the turning point that had taken him years to reach. He had always been an outsider, the kid who had dared to dream big when no one else did. The town had doubted him, and at times so had he. He had been driven by fear, by the need to prove himself to those who had written him off as a failure. But standing here now, amidst the silence, Jack realized something he hadn't before. He wasn't fighting for anyone's approval anymore. He wasn't fighting to be accepted. He wasn't fighting for a piece of land or a lake or money. He was fighting for his truth, for the person he had become. The council members, still seated, exchanged looks. The tension was palpable, but this time, it wasn't aimed at Jack. It was aimed inward, on their own conscience. Jack had turned the tables on them. With one simple, honest statement, he had forced them to confront something they had long ignored. The true value of his success wasn't measured by his wealth, but by the lives he had changed. For so long, he had been defined by the challenges he faced, the fines, the ridicule, the constant struggle to rise above. But now, he was defining himself. He wasn't the man they had once dismissed. He was the man who had built something meaningful from nothing, and that was something no one could take away from him. The council leader, the one who had been the most critical of Jack in the past, finally spoke. His voice, though stern, carried a hint of respect. "Mr. Waters," he began, "it's clear now that your success is not just about what you've built. It's about how you've earned it, how you've turned something that was once a point of division into something that can unite this town. Your actions have shown us that the true measure of success lies in the impact you make, not in what you take." Jack could feel the tension lifting from the room, slowly but surely. The cloud that had hung over him for so long was beginning to dissipate, replaced by something far more powerful: understanding. A recognition that he had not just proven his worth, but had done so in a way that was bigger than any of them had anticipated. And then, in that quiet, almost sacred moment, Jack felt a shift within himself. The battle for approval, the desire for validation, the need to prove something to those who had doubted him, all of it melted away. He was free. Free from the chains of his past, free from the doubts that had once defined him. He had done it. He had overcome. And now he could finally embrace the future without fear. The future that he had built on his own terms. The council, once his adversaries, now stood as silent witnesses to his journey. They had seen him at his lowest, and now they were seeing him at his best. Not because he was the billionaire CEO they had once hoped to break, but because he was a man who had stayed true to himself, even when the world told him he was wrong. Jack's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those who had once criticized him, and for the first time he saw something in their eyes, something that had always been missing: respect. They weren't just seeing the successful businessman now, they were seeing a man who had earned his place, not through power or money, but through the authenticity of his journey. Through his ability to rise, to learn, to grow, and to never give up. With a deep breath, Jack turned and made his way to the door. As he stepped outside, the cool air brushed against his face. The weight of the moment still lingered in the back of his mind, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like freedom. In the distance, he could hear the gentle lapping of the water against the shore, the sound of the lake that had been both his challenge and his triumph. Jack had never really owned the lake, not in the way people thought, but he had claimed it as his own in a way that no one else could. He had reclaimed the power that came from believing in himself, and in the process, he had given that same power back to the town that had once tried to shut him down. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the water. It was a new beginning, not just for Jack, but for everyone in that town who had watched him struggle, fail, and rise again. And as Jack stood there, watching the world around him change, he finally understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't about the wealth or the fame. It wasn't about winning battles or proving people wrong. It was about using your experiences, your hardships, and your triumphs to make the world a better place for everyone. And as Jack watched the sunset that evening, he knew, with clarity, that this was only the beginning. The beginning of a future he had shaped with his own hands, filled with hope, redemption, and